Have you ever been watching a movie for the first time, or reading a new book, or even just doing your first playthrough of a game, and you see this one character and they just seem so familiar to you somehow? Whether it's their looks, their personality, or even just their skill set, there is something about them that just makes you go, wait a minute, where have I seen this person before? And the reason for that is probably because they have fallen into a certain archetype or are even based off of a character that has come before them. In Ecclesiastes 1:9, it talks about how there is no new thing under the sun. And it's just like things just kind of tend to cycle back around. Even things that ideas that seem to have failed before just seem to crop up again and again. And a lot of things that we see these days are now or have been inspired by something that has come before the hand. One example of this is kind of looking back on the previous century is how a lot of writers actually were inspired by the mythologies of Greek and Norse and kind of seeing how that kind of influenced the types of stories they told and how they even incorporated parts of it into that. Like another example is for me, at least, how after like watching a movie or reading a good story, there's just kind of this thing of it triggers something within me of how, okay, what if this was kind of played with in this world, or this was different, or how would things go about this way, or even just how I would treat the franchise if I was privileged enough to write for it. And even though there may be no fruition from those thoughts, it's just kind of a thing that stirs within me to kind of think about stories. Because everything we consume becomes part of us in a way. And that's one reason for being aware of why we or what we watch, what we read, and what we listen to, and just realizing that that changes us. And what comes in is also what comes out. And so, why wouldn't the stories we tell be influenced by our culture, our experiences, or even just the things we're passionate about? And so with that as the setup, I want to hopefully start a bit of discussion with this video. And there may be follow-ups or revisits I do later as I kind of explore this more and think about it more, or even just as I receive feedback from you. And so the question I have is, what do you think about archetypes, Expies, and alternate versions of characters? And with archetypes, what I'm referring to is basically the roles they fill in the story in a sense. And not just protagonists and antagonists, but things like the mad scientist, the action hero, or even just a klutzy love interest. And the thing is about these kind of archetypes is that there are just starting points. They can always segue into different characters, even just based off of what kind of story you're telling. Like the mad scientist in a horror story is probably going to be slightly different than the one in a superhero story or a science fiction story. Or the action hero could completely change what kind of story is being told. Like you could put him into like a horror film, and how does that change it from basically being a slasher fit into an action movie, or would putting the action hero in the horror film just make it more horrific depending on what they're facing? And so, like with the klutzy love interest, for example, could it be that they're just clumsy and unlucky, or could it be that they're purposely playing up their klutziness in order to get attention? And how does that change the story that unfolds? And now with Expies, it's basically that they're referred to almost as exported characters, in that they're based off of a specific character. It's like how in superhero stories, you have someone who fills the Superman role. They have the flight, the super strength, the invulnerability, and they're also filling that role of either being looked up to everyone or feared by everyone. And so it's just kind of, we always see that, and it's just kind of interesting how many times that crops up, even when you don't expect it to, in a way, of how you can just kind of relate to it in a sense. Or, I mean, it's like expected, but it's kind of unexpected when you think about how many times it's actually chopped up. And then another example is with fantasy. If they have elves, they'll probably be very similar to Tolkien's elves in some way. And the reason for this is kind of the same with the Superman kind of Expies, in that they just worked. We know they're popular and so forth, and they're also popular enough that they're familiar to serve as a starting point rather than having to explain the whole concept of an elf or the concept of a superhero. We just know what they are. And so then we get into the taste of alternate versions of characters. And to be honest, the best example is probably that of the evil doppelganger. Whether it's a clone, a twin, or just an alternate universe version, they are basically the same character, but different in some way. And that it could just be a what if, like what if they were separated from their parents at birth, or what if this happened, or what if that just universe is evil. But it just kind of is like the same character, but different. And so one thing that kind of made me think about this a bit differently is I tend to like a lot of hero collecting games where you just kind of amass a collection of heroes and potentially build them up to do whatever activity the game has. And the thing with a lot of them is that they repeat characters. Like they have characters that have become popular for some reason, and they're say, okay, we can do them as a limited seasonal release and do a new version of them so that people will go for them. Maybe change up their skill set or even just upgrade their skill set depending on how it works. And it may be such that you can't use them together, or you can, depending on how the game is set up. But it's just kind of an interesting way of going about it. And what I've seen from those companies that actually have multiple hero collectors under their belts is that they're bringing characters that start in one game into some of their other games later down the line. Like they may be changed to suit the universe depending on what they did in the first one, but the story may be the same, and they could have similar relationships, or it could be completely different. They just have the same name and same face. But it's just kind of an interesting way of going about it in a sense, because the characters have proven popular, so they want to use them again. And so this is kind of the thought I've had as I plan out stories that I want to pursue. But I also think about, could I potentially waste a character if I put them in a story that doesn't work out? And so would it be better to just kind of think about, okay, I can actually use them as kind of starting points and see how they relate to their world as they go about it, or see what happens just because they're interacting with a different set of characters, or they're in a different place in this world, and see how that makes them different, or even just accept that they're popular, I'm going to use them again, and see how that unfolds. But it's just different ways to think about it, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on it with you, and you can share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and share to support the growth of this channel. Anyway, I'm Jonah. You've been watching Lions Mane Media. Talk to you later, and have a great rest of your day.